companies. I mean, for example, there was a recent move to a big German insurance company where a large number of desktops was deployed. Unfortunately, I often hear about these things pretty much when you folks do, because I'm not hugely involved. I mean, if I go to the office and I'm chatting to somebody, I might hear about it, but that happens less these days now. I live on the other side of the world. So I don't really know a huge amount about the French police thing. What I do know is that we're seeing continuing interest in deploying Ubuntu in these environments. And, this is, I think, thanks to the good work going on in Ubuntu, but also really thanks to the good work going on upstream as well. I mean, if it wasn't for the wonderful upstream contributions that were happening, then, Ubuntu would be way less interesting.
Because I do remember the article, and it had, I believe it was some chief of police commenting about how easy the migration was and how happy they were with the system. And then it all went very quiet after that. Assumed everything went well and continued on. But I think, and dare I say it, because I'm just a user at the end of the line with a microphone and an audio cast with Roy, but dare I say it, that Canonical should be making more of these successes, because it gives confidence to new users as well. And I would hope.
I agree.
I would hope if it has been a success, which there's nothing to suggest it hasn't been, because like I say, the last comment was praiseworthy of Ubuntu. And then Canonical should be jumping on these stories and engaging in a little bit of self-promotion like Microsoft.
I don't think the clients want this to be I think it has to be with the consent of the clients. I mean, I sometimes deploy for clients Ubuntu servers, but I cannot give the names of the clients.
No, I assume though, Roy, when the chief of police or whoever it was, and I can't remember offhand, it was somebody high up within the French police service, comes on and gives his comments about how well it's gone. I would expect that they didn't really have a problem with disclosure at that point. I haven't got that in hand, but no, I was just interested if you had any other stories like that, which off the top of your head, which were successes for Ubuntu.
It's really tough because I come from the same school of thought, which is these case studies are great examples of free software in a significant environment. One thing I learned about this was my previous job before I worked at Canonical. I used to work at this organization called Open Advantage, and Open Advantage was a UK government funded project to basically take free software and open source and deploy it in organizations in this region of England called the West Midlands. The West Midlands is a bit like Michigan. A lot of heavy industry has moved abroad, and a lot of people who are working in manual labor have been left out of work. But it's also the West Midlands is also a really burgeoning environment for technology. A lot of because the office space is pretty cheap there. A lot of tech companies have got started. They've got office space and they can get cracking as well. So our responsibility at Open Advantage was to basically, we provide free consultancy essentially. So we would talk with individuals and organizations and deploy software, open source and free software into those organizations. And we had an insane amount. Like we had to shift something like 40 businesses a month, to free software. It was, if you didn't do that, then you didn't get the money essentially. It was like £4.5 million or £4.5 million that we could fund into the project. But the thing that I learned that was incredibly frustrating about that is we'd do a deal with we'd manage to get a really cool deployment somewhere, like with a government body or a big company or whatever it might be. And this would be months and months of work. And of course, back then, for me, it was way easier because it wasn't like I worked for a distributor. We could pick any software we want. I mean, we typically always deployed Ubuntu anyway. But if we felt like it was better to deploy Red Hat or SUSE or whatever it might be, then that's cool. What was really frustrating is that we'd say, okay, well, now we've got this deployed. Why don't we'll write a case study and we'll do a white paper and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of these companies couldn't do that. And the reason why is because a big company courts many different providers. They court, the French police will have been courting us, as well as Red Hat, as well as Microsoft, as well as Apple, probably some other big Unix variants, So I don't know this. I'm just hypothesizing. And what they don't want to do is, when you go out there and you provide a case study, and you basically endorse a particular organization, it will sometimes have a negative impact on potentially getting discounts down the line. Because all of these companies, when they go out there and they want to deploy a particular piece of software, in that level of volume, the originators, the Microsofts or the Canonicals or the Apples of the world will give them huge discounts. And sometimes they'll give them huge discounts in return for a case study. But, you know that if you're going to get a huge discount from Microsoft and, and you're going to be able to deploy Windows for way cheaper than you ever expected, that it's probably going to ding your relationship with another organization, as an example. And that's the reason why you don't see a lot of these case studies. When you see these really big ones, then often you know that those companies or those organizations, they know that they're basically going to stick with that software for years. So therefore they don't mind essentially burning the bridge with those other organizations. So that's the reason why it's one of those frustrating elements of doing business with software is I wish we could have way more of these case studies as well.
Well, it sort of leads on to my final question, really. If obviously the intent is to bring Ubuntu to the masses, and I would hope you would agree that the masses in general don't spend hours on end surfing the net for tech solutions and research.
Yeah.
Because, as we said before, they use it like a toaster. Is Canonical intending to fight fire with fire in respect of Microsoft and hitting the television campaigns? Because at the end of the day, that is how I perceive the people that I deploy Ubuntu to, who never would have had it if it hadn't been for me talking about it.
Yeah.
That's really how you would hit these end users, the ones that I don't speak to, or the ones that haven't heard of Ubuntu before, or too frightened to install it.
This is an area. I mean, this is an area in which. So I don't think you're going to be probably seeing any Ubuntu television advertising anytime soon, just because television advertising is just so expensive. And for a company like Canonical, we're a startup. I mean, we're a startup with a with a rich granddaddy, but we're a startup nonetheless. So we have a limited level of funds that comes in, and we're doing better and better every year in terms of profitability. The growth is phenomenal, but we're still a startup. So with those limited budgets, you have to spend it wisely. And 30 seconds of TV time, which will cost you $50,000, could be spent in ways that could potentially increase your user base in more appropriate ways. And I think the other thing is the applicability of the software. Like, I remember 2-3 years ago, people would ask, why don't we advertise Ubuntu on the TV? I think we'd probably all agree that for most consumer end users 2 or 3 years ago, if they were to install Linux back then, they'd have probably had a more complicated experience than they do today. So you got to make sure that your software is ready for when my mom and dad install it on their computer and they're expecting something that's just effortless and easy. I think we're in a better position today than we've ever been.
I'm not sure if you're aware, Jono, because being in the States, but Ubuntu has actually had a television presence for quite some time. I don't know whether you've had over there the TV sitcom, The IT Crowd.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, for the people that don't know, listen to this. The IT Crowd is a British sitcom. It's a little bit like The Office, and it's set in an IT department. And there's one character called Moss who very proudly on the back of his monitor has an Ubuntu sticker. So that was your sort of television advertising. That was free.
Well, there was a scene in Big Bang Theory as well. There was like a little Ubuntu snippet reference in there as well, which was pretty cool.
I was just creeping in there. So we're just waiting for Doctor Who now to have the reference, and then we'll be there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think one day we will get there. To me, we often talk about the chasm and getting over the chasm. For those people who are unfamiliar with this, if you have a graph and you have a line that goes from the bottom left-hand side of the graph to the top right-hand side of the graph, and then it goes back down again, kind of like a hump. There's a big chunk in the middle that's called getting over. It's called the chasm, and it's basically the gap between tech enthusiasts and consumers. And it's notoriously difficult for people to get over the chasm. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is to try and get Ubuntu to the point where it is that easy for people to use. But I think it's also important that what we don't do is we don't sacrifice our current Linux enthusiast community as well. To me, Ubuntu is a great base to install on your computer. Then you can add all this extra functionality in terms of, tweaking it. You can install Ubuntu, but then you can install CCSM and you can tweak the hell out of Compose and things like that. So.
Well, Roy, before we just move on to the final topic, which isn't Ubuntu related, is there anything else you want to put to Jono?
as far as I can recall, around the release of like, guess in 704, sometimes around 2007, there was an advert in the German subway